Hey friends, this episode is with Traver Boehm, and we had a short amount of time to drop in together and have a catch up since the last time that he came on my show. And man, I loved this conversation. Traver is the leader of the Man Uncivilized Movement. He's written multiple books at this point, and he's been in men's work for a number of years. We drop in on two major subjects on this episode. The first is the passing of his father, which occurred this year in 2024. And he tells us that story of what it was like to be with his dad when he died, what it was like beforehand, what it was like after, what he learned, what he felt. And it was a pretty emotional conversation for me to listen to what he was going through, to know that my dad's still alive at this point, to know that my father wound is similar to Traver's. And yeah, I think if you have energy around your dad, around your father's passing, whether you're a man or a woman, this will be an impactful conversation. And we come out of this with some beautiful lessons. The other thing we talked about is Traver's experience being in a dark room for 28 days and what that was like, what his mind went through, what his life was like going in, and what his life became coming out of there. Being in a dark room, it seems like one of the most terrifying things to me, short of dying. And one of the things that we come to in this episode is that facing death was one of the biggest lessons that came from this experience for Traver. And it helped him live his life more fully. So I thought that was beautiful, and it was really nice to listen to what this experience was like. And he tells a story at the end of the episode, which will surprise you, which will make you laugh at the intersectionality of spirituality and real life. Not that spirituality is not real life, but perhaps spirituality and the physical world. So check that one out. Okay, folks, we mention men's work a few times in this episode. And if you're a man who is not doing men's work, consider this another push in that direction. If you want to work with Traver, check out the Man Uncivilized Movement, manuncivilized.com. If you want to work with my brotherhood that I'm involved with, the Arca Brotherhood, arcabrotherhood.com. We've got groups in person, a lot on the West Coast of North America, and we've got a number of groups online. If you want to work with me and you have an addiction, I run a group called the Freedom from Addiction Circle for Men, and you can just send me a DM on Instagram with the word freedom, and I will give you that information, or you can just go to my website, evolvingman.com. And with that, enjoy this episode, folks, this beautiful episode with Traver Boehm. Traver Boehm, happy to have you on the show again, man. It's nice to sit down with you, and I always love seeing you on my Instagram feed, seeing what you're up to, seeing you speaking passionately to people and bringing your medicine to the world. And so, yeah, I'm excited to just have a digital coffee with you here, sit down, talk about what you've been up to over the last few years, what you're passionate about right now. And, probably scratch the surface because we've only got about 45 minutes, but I'll take all the time I can get. So Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, brother. Always a pleasure.
Okay, man. Two things that are big for me when I look at what's up in your life. One is your dad died this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was impactful for me to read. And I just would love to, in all honesty, man, I love to hear what this process is like for guys that go through it. But B, my dad hasn't died yet. And I'm kind of preparing for that all the time, mentally and emotionally, and would love to listen to your story about what this was like for you, with just knowing that, like, I haven't been through that yet. And any wisdom you have, any insights that came out of this that you want to say to guys who still have their dads around, like,
yeah, for sure.
I'm all ears, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the best way to frame it, Ben, was um, like I knew it was coming for a long time. And I think a lot of guys know it's coming for a long time. And yet it came really fast. And the way I can tease that out a little bit is we probably had 3 incidents over the last 3 years that were like, hey, this isn't good. This could be a signal or a sign that in a couple months he's going to go. And that was like a break of a hip, that was a fall, that was other medical issues. And at Christmas of this past year, he fell again and broke his hip for the second time.
Mhm.
And I had to go back to the East Coast and with my sister explain to him that you have two options here. You have the option of surgery, which you may not live through because you're not in good shape. You're like, it's a risky procedure. The doctors have told us this. The surgeon has told us this. You need to make this choice. Or choice number two, you get to spend the rest of your days in bed because the way your hip is, it dislocates. Like so it's kind of two shitty options here. Do you want kind of, sort of, maybe death, or do you want to just like wither away in a bed? And that was a hard conversation. And that was a maturing conversation for me. I remember walking out of the hospital room going, okay, I'm different now than I was 10 minutes ago, having to explain the man who took care of me, who provided for me, who raised me, that like now I'm giving you these two scenarios. And I actually had to leave that trip before he went into surgery. He chose surgery. And so I remember like landing back here in Denver and immediately turning my phone on to hear like he's alive or he's dead. And I'm saying this because this is a lot of the reality for guys who have families, who have jobs, who live in another coast, who live in another country, that perhaps the fantasy that like, oh, I'll just take the next 3 months off and go to the other coast and work from there and be there with them the whole time. It's not quite that real. And that was the setup, right? And I remember saying to him, this is an important point. I did have some time alone with him before the surgery, and where I got to say, I love you. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you. And he was sort of in and out of consciousness at the time, and almost blew the conversation off. I remember him saying like, I know you love me, like kind of like, hey, like get me out of here and let's get on with things.
Let's get it done.
Yeah. And if we fast forward, Ben, to July, there was maybe 3 weeks before he passed, he fell out of his wheelchair once. And I remember being like, that's not good. And then 2 weeks later, and he was given maybe 3 to 5 months to live at that point. And we were moving him into hospice just to get better care. Hospice is normally a 6-month window, but they were like, he could be okay. We'll just get him better care. And then in a very short span of time, he fell out of his wheelchair again, like 5 or 6 times in 2 days. And I remember thinking, he's done. Because if I were him, I would be done. I would be like, this is embarrassing. Right. This sucks. You know, like you're in your 80s, you've raised kids, you've had a successful career. Now you're falling out of a chair multiple times a day. Yeah. And my sister messaged me saying, hey, I need you to know this. Hospice has just come back in and they've given him not 2 to 3 months, but 2 to 3 weeks. So you may want to get on a plane and come home. And I didn't know what to do. Honestly, Ben, and this is the rock and the hard place I was stuck between. He's lucid now. Do I go home now and spend time with him when he's lucid and then perhaps miss the passing because I can't spend 3 weeks there? Or do I wait the 2 to 3 weeks and try to game the ending, right? It'd be like, when do I get there when I can be there to hold his hand as he transitions? Yeah. And so I reached out to Dewey Freeman, who you probably know, our 70-year-old chief therapist here at Uncivilized, and was on the phone with Dewey saying, what do people come into your therapy practice more for? That they've missed the final lucidity parts, or they've missed the passing parts. Like what fucks guys up more? And Dewey being Dewey, God bless him, he goes, why don't you ask him when he's going to go? And I thought, I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know that was a possibility. And this
Right.
is where it gets freaky, Ben. I then go like looking. Dewey's on the phone with me, and I'm going to text my sister who's in the hospital, ask him when he's going to go. And I don't have to write that text because she had just messaged me saying, hey, he just looked at me and said, I'll be gone in 4 to 5 days.
Wow.
And I went, holy shit. Right. I hung up. I was like, Dewey, I got to go. Hung up, got on Expedia, got on a flight, and was home, was back there 2 or 3 days later. And sat with him to give you guys, or to give you and your listeners the full story. He didn't speak again after telling my sister that. He stopped eating that day. He stopped drinking that day. He just essentially was like, hey, folks, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent the next 4 days in a hospital room with him, watching him die. He couldn't communicate. Very rarely would he open his eyes. If he did, it would be, you could tell there wasn't much cohesion there. And I was with him on the last morning as he took his last breath. And I'll tell you what's impactful, though. And this is for you and for every man listening. I told Dewey, I don't have much else to say to him. I said my I love yous. I said my thank yous. I said my goodbyes 8 months ago or 7 months ago at Christmas. Now here I am with him in the room. And for a different set of stories, I had decided to spend the night, like sleep in his hospital room.
Right.
Just in case he did wake up and looked around and was like, fuck, I'm alone. And this was exhausting because every hour on the hour, someone would come in and give him a painkiller, like a liquid painkiller. So I knew I'd be woken up every hour on the hour for the night, but was like, fuck it, I'll do it. On the very first night, and this is probably the most important night of my life, I was sitting there in the room. He had gotten, they've dressed him and changed him and done the things. I've eaten dinner, and I'm just watching Netflix on my computer, kind of hanging next to him. And I remember starting to feel like, something's coming here. And I had this thought, download, whatever, inspiration that I can watch Netflix anytime I want. And my father's still alive. His body is going. He's not really conscious, but he's still alive. I feel like I still have stuff I may have to say here. And so I closed my computer, and I remember thinking, like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to. It's like your classic men's, do you want to come and sit in the circle in front of everybody? Like, nope, not me. I'm good. I got nothing. I'm totally fine. Yeah. You guys can stop. Like, hey, your bottom lip's shaking. It's not shaking. I swear to God, it's not shaking. And I probably spent the next 3 hours pouring my heart out to this man, of all the ways I was grateful, all the ways I was thankful, all the things I'd missed, and all the ways that our very, very distant relationship had hurt me. Oh, and it wasn't fuck you, why weren't you there for me at my college game? Fuck you. It was, hey, I have to walk around and be in relationship and live my whole life wondering why you weren't that interested in me, and why I never got a phone call in 30 years, why I had to make the phone calls, why when I was done asking the questions about you and my mom, there were no questions back about how I was doing. It was completely one-sided. And I needed to get that off I just needed to clear my body of those words while a living person was still in front of me. And it felt like a plant medicine trip, Ben. Like, I felt like I was hallucinating. I would get in bed with him and hold him and cry. I would sit on the edge of the bed and pray. I would hold his hand. I told him all about my life. Like, hey, I run this incredible men's organization. I built this team from the ground up. I have genius therapists who have no reason to work with me, working at my events. I have people all over the world who subscribe to this. Like, you don't know anything about me. How do you not want to know anything about me? And I literally left, like I got probably 3 hours of sleep that night. And the next day went back to my hotel room to catch a couple hours of sleep and was like, I am complete. And I got on a plane 3 days later after his passing. And I remember a buddy calling and be like, how you doing? I was like, I'm actually okay. I'm actually probably better than I've been in 30 years. And I'm fucked up and it's going to come. But right now, I think I'm actually complete with my own father. And that's the best thing I've been in decades. And I say this to you as it's clearly moving you, and to the audience, that if I had done that to a grave, I think it would have been 10% as impactful.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would have been possible, Ben, to do it to an awake, responsive, hey, Dad, hey, Traver. If there would have been dialogue, I don't know if that would have been possible, given our relationship. So if you have things that are inside of you that are not just the good things about your parents or your father, but also like the challenges of, hey, I love you, and this is what I really could have used, or I think I needed. I believe that's extraordinarily valuable to say while they're still breathing.
Wow, dude. Yeah, it's really impactful to listen to that story. I feel so many feelings as you're sharing this story. Like, the resonance around your father wound being very closely related to mine. I would say very similar things to my dad in a similar position. Just this sense of distance and lack of real depth of connection and curiosity. Yeah. The wound is real. The wound is real there for me as well. And
I believe you.
But the other thing that I feel listening to is just this, like, the beauty that you feel when at the end of a movie, when everything's coming together, and it's just so powerful because you see how the story unfolded, like a beautifully built movie. You're crying at the end because of how they sort of drop the ending, and you're like, oh wow, how artistic, how beautiful was all of that. Like, that's kind of what I feel when you're telling this story, because what a beautiful ending. Not a lot of men or women have this opportunity to sit and do that kind of a clearing, that kind of a process with their parent, awake or semi-conscious or unconscious.
Right.
And so the weaving of how it all happened for you is, I know there's more details to the story, but one thing I know is that the men's work that you've done, the amount of time you've sat in circle, the amount of time you've spent facilitating and feeling that spontaneous rising feeling inside of you that goes, oh, I think we have a therapeutic opportunity here.
Yeah.
And then being willing to step into that and seize that despite the discomfort.
Yeah.
And you instinctively close your laptop and, like, turn towards your dad. So many of us, like, one of the things that you do in group and in men's work is you work through and discard the parts of you that tend to get in the way of that realization. The parts of you that are like, nah, I'll do it later, or no, it's too uncomfortable. I wouldn't know what to say. Like, if I can't plan it all out in advance, I'm not going to stand up and speak, You had worked through all that stuff and you're willing to go, okay, I'm just going to turn into the unknown here, the uncomfortable unknown. And I'm going to take a step forward, and I'm just going to start flapping my gums and saying what comes through me and open my heart. And, the beauty and the resolution that unfolds from that. Oh man. That's incredible.
Yeah. It was such a gift. It was such a gift. I hope men listening to this too this is why we do men's work. Because when I did leave the next day, I was like, that is why I've done 8 years of this shit. That moment. Because the next 40 years of my life will be so different. Having cleared that and having said that, those words are now not in my chest, eating me alive. I don't need to drink tonight because I didn't say the thing I wanted to say. I don't need to look at porn tonight because I can't stand the fact that I just had one sentence I needed him to hear. I'm not going to get high tonight. I'm not going to scream at my partner. I'm not going to get in a fist fight tonight out in a supermarket because I'm just so goddamn angry that I wasn't seen by my dad. I got to say it.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit more synchronicity as to how that all unfolded. And that I literally just look up and go, fuck, I couldn't have scripted. I shouldn't have been there that night. We weren't supposed to spend the night in the rooms, but something happened that allowed us to do that. Right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. The whole thing was magic. I'll show you this one piece super fast. I don't know if you can see. Can you see that?
Yep. Beautiful sunset reflecting off the
Yeah, it was
sand.
actually sunrise. And on the
Sunrise.
final morning, my final night, my sister was like, I actually want to spend the night here. Do you mind? And I remember thinking, I've done the night. Like, I'm the night guy. I'm the fucking protector here. Like, I got this. And I was like, no, you can have it. And driving in that morning, we're in Maine, where I don't think of beach, right? I think of like Maine, and I'm driving from a Motel 6 to a residential, like an old folks home. And I remember seeing this tiny little, like, I don't know how to describe it. You live by the ocean. Like, I looked down the street on the drive-in that I've done this drive-in every day for a week. And I was like, that looks like the ocean. That looks like what it looks like above the ocean. And I kept driving and was like, no, I don't want to miss this. Imagine if he passes and here you are hunting the ocean. And I felt the same thing, like, turn around, go back. I whipped my car around. I drove down the street. Within 3 minutes, I'm at the beach and took my shoes off, rolled my pants up, ran out into the water, splashed water on my face, looked to the side, saw that sunrise and went, oh man, he's going to go today. Like this is the setup that God has made. This is the day you go. And I remember praying and crying and like splashing more water, as much salt water as I could get on my body, and then driving into the facility. And within an hour, he had passed.
Wow.
And I got to be there, and I'm unfortunately my sister wasn't. Right? And if I had done the night shift that night, I would have been sleeping in a hotel just like she was, just trying to get a couple hours before coming back in. So yeah, there was a lot of synchronicity here.
I hear that from guys who are what I call like tuned in, guys who have quieted the surface level mental chatter that we all have sufficiently to actually listen to like what wants to come about in a given moment. My friend Cole Nakatani is so good with this. Him and I have had a few friends die in the last few years, friends close to us and who were around our age, and it was really difficult losses. But Cole he can notice all of the little fish that swam with me when normally fish wouldn't swim with me, and like all the little signs of what's coming or of my friend who passed. Yeah. And so, yeah, what I hear in you is this, like, you've quieted yourself to the point where you're able to hear the whispers that are out there. And the other byproduct of quieting so much of that stuff is that you can show up in a really clean way, because you're not bringing all of your baggage, all of your unfinished business, your emotions that are overwhelming you and pushing you around. You're able to just like drop into them as they come. Yeah. And follow it where it leads you. And clearly Dewey can do that too, because the man was tapped in, yeah, in that moment. Right. So yeah, for me, there's a sign, like when that kind of stuff is happening, it's a sign of health. It's a sign of oh, I'm on the right path. Oh, I'm actually listening right now. But
Mm-hmm.
when things feel really clunky and
Yeah.
rammy and like they're not quite working the way I want to, I know I need to do some cleaning, do some inner work to try to
Mm-hmm.
get to that place where I'm kind of empty. I call it emptying because for me, I feel like there's a lot of layers inside that
Mm.
are just kind of egoic, are wounded, reactivity, agenda,
Mm.
what I want for the world, what
Right.
I want to happen in my life, what I want for you. But underneath all of that stuff, there's just this like essence of who I am. I actually don't
Mm.
need most of that stuff.
Right.
And I need to just figure out how to penetrate the veil and get to that place where I can be, when I can show up consciously
Mm.
from a less reactive place. And that's what I hear in your story
Yeah, man.
is
Thank
that
you.
ability to listen.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful story, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
My
And
pleasure.
yeah, men's work, like guys who are listening, if you haven't done some work around your dad, the thing I like to say to guys is like, everybody has shit with their dad. Every man has shit with his dad that would be very useful to explore before he goes, if you can.
Mm-hmm.
And even if he has gone, would be very useful to explore. That's one of the things that we do in men's work is we sit with each other and we dig into this stuff in
Yeah.
a place where a guy or a group of guys can hold it.
Yeah.
And that is part of that cleaning out process
For sure.
that I referred to.
Let me add
So,
one other piece, if you don't mind, Ben.
mhm,
I think another massive, massive benefit of men's work, and I'm so sorry that you've lost people recently, is being able to sit in a room with death.
mhm,
It's not
yeah,
something that hopefully happens frequently. It's like knowing how to dance because you're going to have to go to a wedding someday. It's not going to
mm,
be every day, but man, when it hits and you can actually be the one in the room who goes, I understand what's happening here. And you'll probably notice that I'm grounded as fuck and calm as fuck, even though
mm,
there's emotion inside of me. And
mhm,
I'm going to be the person that holds this room for everybody else. And if I do fall apart, I will come back quickly.
yeah,
That training, men's work has trained me for that. I spent last weekend with a good friend who's dying of cancer. And I remember leaving going, thank fucking God for men's work, so that I actually
mhm,
got to be a human with him in the room, as opposed to an emotional mess with him in the room. Not to say that
mhm,
there's no place for emotion, but just because he was still alive and I could, hey man, tell me how you're doing. This must be a lot for
yeah,
you. Tell me the weird
yeah,
shit. What's it like to be dying? Oh, you want to talk
yeah,
about how it's going to affect your sons? I can handle that. I'm here with
yeah,
you. I'm not going anywhere. Energetically, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I think that is a master skill that
yeah,
especially those of us who are over 40 and now are going to lose people. Our parents, people are going to pass. And
yeah,
having some level of attunement and emotional capacity around, I'm actually going to be okay in this room. That is such a
mhm,
gift for not only the person dying, but the other people who haven't done the work, and also for you
yeah,
personally. It's a gift for you to be able to be that pillar of groundedness in the face of death.
yeah. Yeah, this sense of, being willing to go to the depths with a person and hold them and hold you
Mm-hmm.
in a very vulnerable moment
Yeah.
versus I'm uncomfortable with the reality of what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not get into the feelings.
Right.
Let's talk about distracting things. Let's talk about the news. Let's talk about what's happening out there in the
Exactly.
world. Let's talk
Exactly.
about all the things that it took me to get there, or let's talk about the machines in this room and what
Right.
service they have at this hospital or not, you know,
Exactly. Yeah,
rather than,
I've been in that room, Ben. I've been in that room. Yeah. Oh, that's a new nurse. Let's talk about the new nursing schedule. Like, hey, how are you
yeah,
doing?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Yeah, and you know, the thing that hit me the most around what you were saying is that's a master skill. And I think the thing that I want to say the most is that's not something that most of us are born with, and it's actually something that every man can learn.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely not me.
Mm-hmm.
I am not comfortable talking about death. I'm not comfortable dropping into feelings when things are heavy. When things get heavy in the room, I kind of I get tense and I think about backing out of here. Know that that's okay. You're not broken. You're not inferior. Like, you can learn that. And it's really just about spending time in these kinds of spaces.
Yeah.
Just practice being there. Practice looking into other men's eyes and just dropping your defenses and breathing, you know. Practice all the stuff that we do in men's work, and you will train yourself to have more and more capacity to hold emotion, to hold other people's emotions, to hold the grief of life that inevitably comes to us all. So, so the second big subject that I wanted to ask you about was, and it definitely plays into this issue of, or this topic of capacity, and, you know, like, what can you handle? What can you hold? Did you seriously do 28 days of darkness in a dark room? Okay. First of all, you're kind of crazy.
I'm doing 49 this summer.
Jesus, Traver.
Yeah.
Jesus. Why? What did you learn? You know, I know you wrote a whole book about this, so, you know, we're just going to scratch the surface here. But
sure,
you know, I've heard about 4-day things, 5-day things.
Yeah.
This is so intense to my reality, to my mind, to the part of me that is so addicted to doing and getting shit done. I am a busybody, and
I feel you.
The idea, the concept of doing nothing for that long, it makes me itchy and scratchy just thinking about it. So I'm sure if you're doing 2 months, do you say how long?
49 days.
How long? If you're doing 49 days,
Yeah.
Then the 28 days must have been huge for you. So would love to hear about that.
It does tie in, brother, because about 3 months before I went in for the 28 days, I was at a Robert Masters workshop, and it was a small group. It was only about 6 of us. And I was on a project that I had dubbed the Year to Live project, a year-long idea of living the year as if it was my last. And I shared that with the group. And one of the guys pulled me aside after, and he was, at the time, terminal. He had cirrhosis of the liver. He'd been given 6 months to live. And he nonchalantly, like kind of in between bites of lunch, said, "Oh, you're interested in death." I just got chills. Woof. He goes, "If you really want to understand death without dying, you have to do a dark retreat." And I said, "What the fuck's a dark retreat?" And he explained it to me and said he'd done 180 days in total, not at once, but in these sections, 49 days, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, cool. What, you know, how was it? He's like, well, the first time I didn't make 49 days, they pulled me out at like day 43, 44, because I was like bleeding from my eyes, nose, and ears. And I went, oh, okay, why were you doing that? Like, why were you, you know, like, I have a medical background. That's not good. And he goes, well, it was in Tibet, and the Tibetans told me that I had meditated so deeply that I encountered demons. And now if you look at me, I'm from Connecticut. I'm a white boy. I'm pretty standard height, standard issue. And so my question was, did you encounter demons? Like, is this something I haven't done this? Is this possible? Yeah. And he kind of like half smiles at me, Ben, and goes, nah, I think I just had food poisoning, but you should probably do this, right? So that night I went home and Googled like dark retreat and had a couple places popped up, and one got back to me in Guatemala. And my frame for entering the room was sort of twofold. Was one, I want to experience an initiation. I didn't have this languaging. I want to experience something that is so antithetical to any strength or talent that I have, right? That I want to be tested in a brand new way. I'm an athlete. I'm a fighter. I'm a writer. I'm a businessman. I'm a speaker. None of that has any value as soon as a door is closed behind you and you're staring at a month alone in a pitch black room. So I wanted to like, what am I made? I almost wanted the test. And then this is a nuanced thing to say because it's not purely masochistic. At the time, I was on rock bottom. I was in the middle of a divorce I didn't want. She had had a miscarriage that obviously I didn't want. My business partnership had ended. I had left a community that I spent 6 years personally building. Like I was in the middle of that midlife shitstorm rock bottom. And my curiosity was, and again, I'm not masochistic, what's underneath rock bottom? So hopefully I never get to rock bottom again. But while I'm here, why don't I dig a little bit and see what else is down there? And like not waste the opportunity. And so I wanted to also know what happens to a person who's going through what I'm going through if you then take his eyes away, if you then take people away, if you then take a habit and pattern and everything that's normal away, what else would come to the surface? And so it was it was an awful experience. I know you're saying like it must have been impactful. I'm going back in, but it took 8 years to go back in. And the only reason I'm going back in is because I literally felt called. Like I woke up a year ago after my cousin had killed himself. And I remember not thinking, but like viscerally feeling, I have to go back. One, I need to write this book and talk about what happened the first time. Two, I have to go back. There is no choice. And I reached out to the people that day and said, hey, I want to do 7 weeks, which is the longest time you're allowed to do. And sort of the set prescription, if you were doing like the traditional Tibetan way, they're not like, oh, 3 days and check it out. And if you're not happy, you come out. Or a week, it's like you go in for 7 weeks. And so that is my plan for this summer. And to tell you quite honestly, that idea, as soon as I knew I was doing it and I got it scheduled and signed up, I immediately started feeling very uncomfortable on a depth I didn't know before. So I will wake up in the middle of the night uncomfortable. I will wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and be like, fuck, man. All right. I'm going back in. And yet I also am not purely masochistic. Like I believe that there are answers in that room that I can't get elsewhere. And there's an initiation into what I want to do with the next chapter of my life that I will have access to once I go through that process, but I don't have access to right now.
Wow. Yeah, you clearly are the kind of guy who always seizes the inner work opportunity. This is another situation where despite being in one of your worst places of your life, you're like, oh, I'm going to like go even deeper and see what's down there. Cause I ain't coming back kind of thing, like you really do have a warrior mentality. But a strong connection to your gut, right? Because you're feeling called. Like I acknowledge that process of feeling called to something. Ayahuasca is part of my path, and so sometimes people come to me and they're like, "Hey, like I'm thinking about ayahuasca. Like, can I run something by you?" And they ask, and I ask them like, "Where is this thinking about ayahuasca coming from? Like, are you feeling called, or are you like just curious?" Because you've like tried everything else and you saw it on a podcast or something, like at what level of your being is calling, is it from up here or is it like deeper down? Is it something that you just like wake up in the middle of the night over, or that just like hits you like
Mm.
a blunt object in your belly at some
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
you know, and you've got that.
Yeah.
So I would love to just hear a few minutes about that first dark retreat and,
Mm.
you know, what did happen for you? Like, I've heard that after the first few days, you know, you start having DMT release, you lose all sense of time.
Mm.
Although I suppose you would know somewhat when you've hit a day because food comes in and out a certain
Mm-hmm.
amount of times
Mm-hmm.
per day.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sleeping? Are you awake most of the time? And like big lessons or realizations that occurred for you in there?
Yeah, man. I waited for the hallucinations. I was like, cool. It's supposed to come on day 11, like 8 more days. Let's do this. You know, this could
Yeah.
get a lot more interesting if this was on acid. And it didn't happen. I would very, very rarely have hallucinations. What I would have is what I would speak to anybody who's done plant medicine is kind of fall into some kind of process where someone may be in the room speaking to me and I'm having a full conversation with them, but they're not in there. There's some entity or some process happening. I would fall into deep, deep grief. There were days and days and days where I just sobbed on the floor over the ending of my marriage, over the miscarriage, over the leaving of community, over that whole process that I had dealt with, in quotes, you know, for 50 minutes a week at therapy, but never fully, okay. And guess what? You're going to go back and grieve all the things you haven't, because that was the start of my men's work process. It was the start of my therapy process. It was the start of like the awakening process. Step one, go back and grieve. So, and then the second point, I knew what time it was and I knew what day it was every single day because of the food. And I got fed the exact same times. So I knew with one exception of a story I can share with you. I'd say the biggest lesson was around death, Ben. There was a day towards the end where I'm not sleeping, terrible sleep, just terrible. Like I would literally lay in bed at night. There was like a 3-day period where I had this bright, shining light in my eye that I could not get to go away. And I would literally touch my raw eyeball to see if my eye was open and then close my eyes and touch my eye to see if it was closed. And the light was still there shining. So there were things like that that just made it excruciating. The facility itself, the room itself was concrete. There was no comfort. I had a yoga mat as like furniture. Now that's a month sitting on a yoga mat. The bed was this little wooden loft with a very, very thin mattress that my bones would just ache and fall asleep. And like I didn't sleep for more than like a half hour at a time for a month. So by day 25, 26, I'm a mess. And I remember having a period of about a day wondering, perhaps they've forgotten about me and I've died. And I can't quite reason the fact that like that didn't happen. You know, my faculties had gone to a point where I went, I may actually be dead, and was trying to like touch my body and touch the wall and reason it out, but I couldn't get the reason. It was too far gone. And at some point came out of that process, but thought and deeply somatically felt this is coming anyway. Like death is coming. Death is not this thing that I'm now going to read about in poetry books. I'm turning 40. I'm about the halfway point statistically of my life. This is what death will actually be like. I will be alone. I will be in pitch black, whether I'm cremated or buried. I will be gone from society, from my family, from people who love me, from my friends. I will be unavailable, and life will go on as if I was never here. Man, my life is completely irrelevant. Now, here's the comma. That means I have complete freedom of whatever I want to do when I get out of this room. Because if I fuck up so royally with my ideas and my books and my things, I'm dead in 40 years anyway, and no one's going to remember. If I hit the grand slam of all grand slams and change the world, there's no avoiding the box, right? I'm still going to be 6 feet under, or sprinkled in the ocean or something, I'm still going to be gone. And that revelatory, like everybody listening to this is like, yeah, at some point, you're going to die. I doubt any of you or your listeners are like, nah, it ain't happening to me. There's like 8% of us that just like live forever. Maybe AI. This is like a pre-AI conversation. So maybe it's true. But for those of us who, it was really freeing. Right. I remember coming out and going, cool, let's write books. Let's get on stages. Let's start spitting truth. Let's be fearless about all the things that we do, because fuck it. This is where we're going to end up no matter what. And that's a big deal, right?
Yeah. So there was this freedom that came from really like diving into and embracing your death for a moment there, or for days.
For a day. Yeah.
That on the other side of that comes this huge relief of pressure that we all tend to have on ourselves about how life should go.
Yeah.
This sense of needing to control how it goes, or to control the outcomes.
Doesn't matter.
When you face that, like, yeah, buddy, you're going whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So when that door opens, what do you really want to do? If you were living your best life, what do you really want to do? And then go do that from a place of freedom and full self-expression, and not from a place of having to perform. You got to make your reputation back. You got to get her back. You got to prove it to the world. Like all of these things that we all have on a higher layer in our minds that sort of run our show. You dropped way below all that shit.
Yeah.
And, in that way, you transcend it.
Yeah. And at least get a taste of it, right? Like a somatic taste of it, as opposed to, I read this book about death and now I have a different thought about it. Like it was in my being that this process was going to come at some point, no matter what. So let's live differently. And I'll leave you with one final story, because I know we're rubbing up on time here. When I went in, the woman who was, quote, in charge of me, ran the facility, etc., said, hey, just so you know, there will be periods in there where 15 minutes feels like a year, and where days may pass and it feels like no time has gone by at all. So just be okay with time being odd, right? So one day I eat lunch, I put my food back in the little food tray, I go meditate, do my push-ups, I'm lying on my back for a while, do some other stuff. I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I got a feeling of like, okay, it's been, lunch was at 12:30, dinner was at 5:30. Done my stuff, waiting now, like, okay, it's pretty soon dinner's going to come. I'll hear the little bell and I'll know it's dinner. And doesn't come. And I'm like, man, this may be one of those times. Like, this is crazy. Doesn't come, Ben. Doesn't come. And I'm like, oh shit. Like, time is bending. Like, it's happening right now, this thing that she talked about. But I have, again, this is like 2 weeks in, so I'm a little bit fucking nuts, but not too far gone, where I'm like, yeah, but I know what 5 hours feels like. I'm getting hungry, like my body doesn't know that it's only been 15 minutes. It wants dinner. And after what felt like hours and hours and hours and hours, I said, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go to bed. So I get in bed and pretend that like something had just happened, and lying in bed, still kind of keeping an ear out of like, this has to come. What is going on?
Yeah.
How could time have stretched this far and this far and this far and this far? And I may have fallen asleep for a little bit and woke up and then was lying in bed. I'm like, 4 hours. It's only 12:35, or sorry, 5 hours. This is impossible. And then I hear it. I hear the bell after what's felt like a full day. And I'm like, holy shit, that was 5 hours. Maybe they forgot, and I'll go check. And if it's dinner, I'll know that whole time period was only 5 hours. If it's breakfast, then something else. So I like get out of bed, hear the bell, rip the Tupperware open. All I can do is smell, and it's like, smells like curry or smells like soup. Like, this is dinner. Holy shit. that whole period had been 5 hours. So I eat dinner and I'm like, I'm still all now kind of fucked up time wise, put the box back, close the little thing, get back in bed. I'm like, all right, cool. I'll try to sleep, 10, 12 hours and get up when breakfast comes. And I literally put my head back on the pillow. I'm thinking, I'm trying to sort things out. Hear the bell again. Holy shit. From 5 p.m. to 9:30 a.m., that's like 14 hours. That has gone in a flash. So I'm like super confused. Come down, open the Tupperware up again. It smells like cinnamon. It's like my breakfast gruel. I eat it. And then about 2 weeks later, I get out. And I remember like meeting one of the women who had taken care of me and who was in the kitchen. And I was like, hey, I have a question for you. On day like 13, did you fucking forget to feed me dinner? And I see her eyes go wide, Ben. And she goes, I'm so sorry. Here's what happened. We made your dinner. We put it out. I thought someone else gave it to you. I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to start my day. I see your dinner there. I go wake up the other girl and she goes, don't worry about it. He's probably fucking nuts by now. So just feed him dinner and then an hour later feed him breakfast and he'll think time got all warped. And so... So it was also a really good lesson for you spiritual bypassers that like sometimes reality is actually true and someone just forgot to feed you.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. The mind is so tricky. The way that it interacts with reality in these kinds of spaces, this kind of stuff happens in ayahuasca all the time. It's like, no, actually, sometimes the most simple explanation is the true explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
Not some paranormal thing.
Right.
Oh man, that's funny. I was not expecting that that ending. Traver, thank you, dude, for dropping in with me.
My pleasure.
I love how we just went in there, and yeah, always good to talk with you. Always good to hear your heart and like your passion and your insight, the way that you describe things. And, most of all, this time speaking with you after 3 or 4 years since the last time we talked, I can just feel the groundedness, the depth of wisdom, like the old man wisdom that's like growing into like mycelium, just like filling you up. I can really feel that sort of.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, that fatherly, wise man energy that the guys of the uncivilized community are so lucky to
Thank you, brother.
absorb. Yeah. Thank you, man. Tell us 2 ways that people can follow you or find you and find your work.
Yeah. manuncivilized.com and Instagram. I'm at Traver Boehm. I also have a podcast called The Uncivilized Podcast. And the book he was talking about is called 28 Days in Darkness. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. It comes out in February. But it's a doozy, brother. It's about my entire month in there from day 1 to day 28.
Wow, man. Thank you for sharing that with the world. And thanks for coming on my show, brother.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, man.
All the best.